Okay, the first thing we're going to do is talk about splitting the tube correctly. We look for the seam that runs down the entire length of the cane. Sometimes it's easier to see, sometimes it's harder to see. What we want to do is keep track of that seam. I will mark it on here with my pencil, like such. And I want to split that so that that becomes the center of one of the pieces of cane, rather than an expensive reed splitter. I have a very old herder knife with a wide back on it. We will lay this across here and very easily split the cane into 4 sections. One of those sections will have the seam in it. The reason we do not split the cane directly through the seam is because the seam has a thicker density to it than the rest of the tube. And by splitting it so that the seam ends up in one portion of the cane, we have a 50% chance of making a fairly decent reed out of that. But better than that, these 3 pieces of cane will all have a similar density. If we split it directly on the seam, meaning through here, then these 2 pieces will have a thicker density in the center on one side and less dense on the outside, thereby creating 2 uneven reeds. This way we have 4 fairly even reeds. We will now go to using the guillotine, which will cut the cane to the proper length for the gouging machine. We want to look for the straightest portion. So what I do, I will take my gouger and I'll line the cane up like such. And you'll be able to see very quickly over here, the cane is up higher. That's the part that we wish to cut off. Put it in your guillotine, very easily chop it off. Do the same thing for all 4 pieces. And your cane is now ready for the gouger. This cane has been in the water approximately a week. It's much easier to gouge it after it's fairly well soaked. You would put the cane in the gouger and see if it's going to stay there. This cane does not want to stay there. The reason is it's a little bit wide, and so with a terrific knife like this box cutter, we can very easily remove a side of the cane, and it will now fit into the gouger pretty nicely. Being left-handed makes it much easier than being right-handed. You pull your gouger all the way back, and I keep my thumb at the tip of this so that it doesn't fall out of the bed, just to start it. And then very easily we go back and forth, not pushing too hard. The cane is coming off quite nicely until it stops removing cane altogether. And we are done. This is a beautifully gouged piece of cane, thinner on the edges, thicker in the center, but very nicely gouged. This cane is approximately set to 50 thousandths of an inch in the center and then tapering thinner on the outside. This allows the center of your reed to have a little more wood on it and still vibrate. After you've gouged the cane, what we want to do is smooth out the inside and make sure that the gouge was done really nicely. I'll wrap a fairly thick 180 piece of wet and dry sandpaper around my 1-inch dowel, and on the palm of my hand, don't want to take too much cane off, but we'll just scrub it a little bit. And once we've gone past that, put it back in the water, and then with a little bit finer sandpaper, do it again. And then with even finer sandpaper, something like 600, we really make it very smooth almost like glass on the inside of the cane. And rinse it off. And you have a beautiful, smooth, evenly gouged piece of cane. This is commercially profiled cane. It's not awful, but it's very thick back here. It's way too thin in the center. And there'll be way too much work to do. Chances are, if you don't do any work in the back, you will split the cane when you're making the reed. Hence, I really prefer not buying profiled or shaped cane. The shaped cane is by far way too wide to make a reed out of. So we will set that aside. So if you can't afford an expensive profiling machine, what we're going to do is we're going to learn how to profile cane by hand. This is very simple. This is the cane I had just gouged. On my plastic easel, this is a 1-inch easel with five lines on it, one for each end of the cane, one for each collar, here and here, and one for the center line. These are normal hose clamps with a washer that has been soldered onto the slot where the screwdriver goes. This just makes access to putting it on and off the easel a much easier process. What we will do now is we will line up this hose clamp with the collar mark on one end, and we'll do the same thing on the other end, keeping the washers kind of out of the way. When I first started doing this with my first teacher, I was using a hacksaw blade that had been put on a grinding wheel this way so that there was a burr on one edge of it, which is what we're going to use to start the cane. It will take off the bark very quickly. This way and this way. You go all the way up to the hose clamp, and you won't be able to go any further. And then with your file, we can start working out a nice collar on both ends. And then you can take an old knife and working in a rooftop so that you're leaving more of a center line down here, all the way from one side to the other. This will create a nice spine on your cane. And then probably with a larger file, we'll get rid of this excess wood here. This is creating a very clean collar. On the reed. Once you've established a very good collar, you'll be able to take the hose clamps off and work the reed as it is. We're working on keeping the spine running down the center of the cane and thinning out the sides. In a little bit we will work in the center of the cane, but we want to keep this rooftop running from the center out to both sides. This rooftop can be worked keeping your file wet, going across the center, you turn it around, and you do the other side. And you keep doing this until it's fairly white in the center of the cane. And the way to check it is to put your two thumbs behind the center of the cane and pull. And you want it to be able to bend very easily. This is still quite thick in the center. So we would continue with the file until we have a very fine white line running across here. Now, as an example, I have already pre-done this to one piece of cane, as you will see here. This was hand profiled yesterday. Beautiful spine, very thin in the center, very thin on the sides, and it flexes very easily in the center. as such. This will be a beautiful reed. Now we're going to profile cane using an actual reed profiler. This particular profiler was handmade by a group of high school students when I was in high school some 40 years ago. Still works fantastic, never any problems, and it has a carbide cutting blade which never gets dull, hence you never have to sharpen the blade. We will put the cane on here. It's a little too wide, so once again checking the curve so we have an even circumference of the cane so that it fits on the easel. We will line this up in the center, clamp it down on both ends, and you will find that if you start here on the edge, your workload will be much less than if you're trying to start in the center. And as you go across, it will become very smooth and very even without digging up the cane. We keep doing this for a little bit until it stops removing cane. Now, I'm a very firm believer in having a beautiful collar, and unless you happen to have access to a rigger profiler which will actually put the collar in, there's another way to do it. Pull your handle all the way to the back. Lay it down hard on the cane, and as you're pushing down, you can twist the easel underneath. This creates a very fine line on the back of the cane. This next process is a little trickier, but what we will do next is we will take a box cutter and very lightly scribe through that line. Then pare back the excess cane as such on both ends. This will come off very easily. Then with your file, just even it out, smooth it out, make a nice even collar across the back of the cane, and then put it back on the machine and do it one last time. When you're done, you'll have beautiful collars already done on both ends of the cane. As a last thing to do, we will take the knife and just very gently scribe through the center line so we have a folding point to put it on our folding shaper and fold it over. And there you have it. So now we are going to fold this over, put it on a folding shaper, which is what this is. You can line it up evenly. Always check it under the light. Make sure that you're centered with your shaper. If your shaper is too narrow, you can slide the cane up actually a little bit. And what that does is it brings the collar a little higher on the blade, and you'll actually end up with a little wider collar. If your shaper is very wide, then bring it all the way down. This particular shaper is kind of in the middle, and so I'm going to leave it up about that far, and then I'm going to clamp it down tight. Now, as you've seen before, this box cutter, this has a Lennox blade. These Lennox blades are gold coated at the tip. These are fabulous. You can buy these at Home Depot. Regular box cutter blades are very fragile. They don't last long at all, but these are terrific blades. Lennox makes them. The way to do this without cutting your fingers off is you put this handle up against your chest. You grab the reed tightly with one hand underneath so that the cane does not move. And then as you pull towards you, the cane will come off in a slicing fashion. And then, very carefully at the tip, we will take off. The other thing to be very careful about when you're doing this is not to turn the knife this way or this way and remove cane unnecessarily. Keep the knife perfectly flat on the shaper. When that's done, you turn it over and you do the other side. And you just keep the knife perfectly flat, aiming towards you and out of the way. Keep these fingers out of the way until it's all done. Once that's done, you can remove the cane and you're ready to make a blank. Okay, now we're going to discuss shaping with a straight shaper. This is a Prestini number 1. Because a Prestini number 1 is fairly narrow, what I have done with my profiler is I've moved the collars closer together, keeping it into a wider portion of the shaper. And you can experiment forever till you find exactly the width of the collar that you want. Make sure the cane is symmetrical, and when you put it in the shaper, make sure that you put it in directly in the center and tighten both screws down tight. I prefer this kind of shaper because your knife cannot vary from side to side. It can only follow the shaper itself. Holding it on one end towards shaping towards the other, it cuts very easily. Never cut from back here. You cut very close to the center and keep your knife flat. You see the angle of the knife is almost flat to the shaper. You don't want it up like this or you'll be digging into the metal of the shaper. Keep it very flat and just scrape along the surface. In a matter of seconds, you are done. This cane has been shaped. I will then take my knife and in the groove I will cut out the V. This allows me to center it onto my profiler and know exactly where the center of the cane is. And now we have a beautifully shaped piece of cane. Okay, now we're going to profile a piece of shaped cane. You can actually do this if you bought profiled cane and you want to reprofile it. We line up those notches to the center line of the easel. Put your cane in the center of the easel. And once again, you want to start on the edge and work your way across. The cane comes off very easily. When most of the cane is removed, we will do exactly what we did with the unshaped cane. We will push it down and make a line in the back. Same thing over here. Push it down, make a line in the back. We will then take our cutting knife and go through that line, remove the cane. You'll be able to see the excess cane very easily on both ends. And then with the file, you will even it out. Don't take off too much wood. Put it back on your profiler. And let the profiler remove anything it wants to. And then just go over nicely with the file one last time, a little bit. And let's hold this up to the light. And we can see we have beautiful collars. Beautiful collars, top and bottom of this reed. Put it back on the easel, line it up to the grooves, and mark a center line like we did with the non-shaped cane, and fold it over. And that's what it would look like. Now this profiler is leaving a little bit more cane on the reed than other profilers might, and the reason for that we'll discuss later. I'm going to introduce you to the world of Reed Dual electric profiling machine. I love this machine. I've had it since 1968. It's still in production by a man named Proslin and somewhere in Palm Beach. You can see what I'm doing. Those canes that I left thick when I was profiling them, I put on a 1-inch dowel. This is actually a shower curtain that's been cut into pieces, so I have many of these. The cane needs to dry for a few days on this 1-inch dowel so that it maintains the same curve as this machine. What this machine does originally was supposed to produce finished reeds. It doesn't do that. But what it will do is it will make a beautiful profile. So here is cane that's been profiled off my hand profiler. We will put double stick tape on one side of this machine and another piece here. And what you need is a good model. This is a model profile over here that's been there for quite a number of years. Well, if you buy this machine now, which you can still do, the producer has put clamps so that you can actually clamp the cane down without the double stick tape. However, I much prefer the double stick tape because it doesn't allow for any shaking of the cane. And you can easily convert it back to this style. The other thing I have done, which the company has yet to do, is I've put a hose clamp on each end. And what this does is it stops at the correct point on each end, and you can adjust it so that you're not sanding beyond the collars of the reed. There's a knob in the back that will adjust the thickness. It's a little bit noisy. This is nothing but sandpaper here. So what we do is we center this cane on the reed dual, line it up exactly in the center, and then push down hard on it. Make sure it's very firm onto the machine. You will excuse the noise for a moment. Only with the right hand, never the left hand. And you just very gently slide back and forth. When I've done one side, I'm going to turn it around just to make sure both sides are exactly the same. And then we'll take it off. And you can see the spine in here. In fact, as you can see, this is one of those pieces where the ridge of the cane that ran right down through it. But this is a beautifully profiled piece of cane. Much easier to make a reed out of something like this. That's the Reed Dual. Okay, we're going on with the profiled cane that we had just used a minute ago. First thing you want to do is make sure your collars are even. Sometimes they are, and unfortunately, many times they're not. If they're not, what you want to do is even them up now. Don't wait till later. So I will mark just how much longer one is than the other. It's very little. And then I will scribe through the back like we originally did on the easel. Just a little bit. Take off a little bit of cane. Once again, even it out with your file. So the collars are both even, and then we can proceed. Perfectly even collars now. The next thing is if you have moved up your front collar to a higher position, that means that the back end of your cane is too long at this point. So what we need to do is shorten it. This is a wonderful tool that you can make. It's just a piece of cane. On one end, I know exactly where I want the collar. On the other end, I have a line marked for exactly where I want the first wire. And the thickness here is the distance between the first wire and the second wire. And this saves a great deal of measurement time. So I will line up the two collars together, and with my nippers I will shorten the cane as such, fold it over, shorten the other side, keep it wet. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is score the cane. It means going through the bark with this utility knife. The knife is going to be held up very much straight this way, and we don't want to split the cane. The safest way to do this is put it at the end of your easel. Hold it against your chest, and from the collar just go through the cane approximately a millimeter apart. Keep your hand steady. Have nice straight lines. Turn it around and do the other side exactly the same. Don't go through the cane, just through the bark. You'll be able to see the white color of the softer cane coming through. When you're done with that, what we will do now is get ready to put the first wire on. But before we do that, we want to make sure that both sides are exactly even. And so we'll take a piece of sandpaper and just lightly go over the sides of it. Don't let go. Turn it over. Do the same thing on this side. And it should look like one piece of wood up here in the front, that both sides are even. We're going to put the first wire on now. And the best way to do that is to start with a short end sticking up this way. I'm going to wrap it clockwise, tightly around here, so that it looks like that. Then I'm going to line up the two ends so that the twist part is in the center of the reed, and twist it a little bit with my fingers so that it looks like that. And that twist was counterclockwise. So if you wrap it clockwise, you will twist it counterclockwise. I'm then going to take the tool that I had made earlier and push this first wire into place so that it lines up exactly 1 inch the center of the wire. At this point I'm going to pull and create a hole in the wire and the reed. And then if you twist the reed rather than the pliers, it's a little easier. Take your pliers this way, straighten it out. Make sure everything is lined up really nicely. Give it another tug and do it again. Always best to grab it at the end. Don't grab it up here, but grab it out here at the end to do your twisting. The wire has much less chance of breaking. And then for a final look, just look at the sides, and with your pliers, if they've slipped a little bit, just go back here like this and line them up so they are perfectly even where the first wire is. Okay, at this point we're going to steam the reed open and try to avoid any cracks into the blade area. There shouldn't be. If you hold the reed between, right at the wire here, in the hole of your pliers. These are reed pliers. Hold it over the steam. Don't put your hand over the steam. Depending on the density of the cane, some cane will get soft very quickly, and other cane will take longer. But we want to make it soft so it's pliable. So I'm not squeezing it all yet. I'm just letting it sit there. After maybe 15 or 20 seconds, I'll very gently start to squeeze it and see if it wants to bend at all. This one's starting to come. At that point, I can put the mandrel in, and I prefer to do this with my hand. there's a line on this mandrel. This is a Popkin mandrel, and the newer ones come with the line already in them. I prefer pushing it down to the line on the mandrel, and then I will hold it up to this light. And I want to make sure that the mandrel is exactly in the center. And if it isn't, just push from one side or the other. We're now going to steam it some more. We really want it quite soft at this point. There's no cracks, no problems. Now when you want to make it round, start on the top of the reed. Don't start on the sides here, but start on the top and the bottom. And you can squeeze pretty hard at that point. Not worrying about anything splitting or anything like that. And then gradually work around the sides. You want it to conform to the mandrel. Just keep going around, and then just another light tug on the first wire, just to shape it around the mandrel at the first wire. We're now going to put the second wire on, as we did the first. Start with the short end, go around clockwise. If you're right-handed, you may want to do this in reverse, so that the twist is on the opposite side. Twist as much as you can with the fingers. A gentle tug to kind of set it into place. And then with the measuring stick that we talked about earlier, I will adjust it so that it's 1 inch, 8 millimeters, 8 millimeters exactly, from the center of the first wire to the center of the second wire, which means this is a little smaller than that. And then just twist it. You don't have to pull this wire. And you see, once again I'm twisting far out so that the wire doesn't break. We cut it off. The third wire I don't worry about the measurements too much of. Anywhere from 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch down here. It's all going to be covered with string. We did the same thing. Put your twist on the other side. Grab it far out. And the same thing here. Now on this one, you might find it beneficial just to swish it this way. I'm not pulling, but I'm just making sure it's nice and round that way, because that's the end that's going to go on the bocal, and cut it off. At this point, we're just going to remove it from the mandrel and put it on the drying rack. Let it sit there for a couple of days. I use this method with the 3 wires when the shaper is on the narrow side, which my shaper tends to be. And this will allow the actual reed to end up a little wider than the process I'm going to show you now. We're going to start with another piece of cane. We do the same thing, hold it in the hole and hold it over the steam. Let it get nice and soft. This piece is actually a little softer than the first one. Okay, we'll put it on the mandrel with our hands, push it down to the line, make sure it's in the center. Really important. Put it back over the steam. "10 or 15 seconds on each side. It's usually pretty good at this point. Okay? Once again, from the top and the bottom, not the sides yet. Squeeze hard, really hard, from the top and the bottom. Get that cane to conform to the shape of the mandrel. Now we can go to the sides a little bit and make it round. We'll give a little tug to the first wire. And this one, we're going to wrap with the rubber bands. So what we are going to do is we're going to put the mandrel in here first, just till it's snug. We'll take a small rubber band like this that's been cut, and starting in the back where the bocal would be, wrap it fairly tight, a lot of it. We want that to be very round. Then as you go up towards the first wire, it doesn't have to be quite so tight. And then you will finish it off by wrapping it over your finger and then just slide the end underneath, and it will stay there. And we have a beautiful blank, and let that sit on the stand for a few days, as you can see. Okay, the rubber band was on this reed a few days. It's fine to leave it on there 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, even a week at that point, but at least 2 days, so that the reed has proper time to dry. Okay, it's beautifully round already, but we do want to bevel it. And so what we're going to do is we're going to remove the first wire, just untwist it a little bit, then with the nippers on your pliers, you'll be able to remove the first wire. Just take it off. You need a flat surface. This is a sharpening stone, and I prefer that because it's up in the air. I can get to it quite easily. Very carefully open up your reed. The first thing we're going to do is bevel just into the blade a little bit, the whole back. A few strokes. This is 180 wet and dry sandpaper. I'm doing this dry. And then the last 3/8 of an inch, we're going to remove quite a bit of cane back here, keeping it flat. And then we'll turn it around, just a few strokes through the front, and then in the back. The reason we didn't want to split it, or when we were scoring it, split it apart, is it's very hard to sand it if the cane is all split apart. If it's still one piece of cane, it's much easier to do this. At this point now, when we close the reed up, it's apart in the back. And what happens now is when you put the third wire on, the front blades will open up and become freer. And the explanation I use with my students is that if you were trying to clap and somebody was pushing your two hands together tightly, it would be very hard to clap. By the same token, if your blades are too far apart this way, too loose, then we don't get what we want, and it requires too much pressure on the blades to get them back together. But what we're striving for is that they're very gently able to move against each other. And by beveling this way, when we do this, we open up the blades, we put the first wire on, and it creates a much freer vibration into the front of the blade. So now what we're going to do is put the third wire on. I'll put it back on my popkin mandrel. Put the wire on the same way I've been doing. Twist it as much as you can with your fingers. About 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch. Twist from the far out end. You can see that the sides are still apart. Okay? Once I've got the wire on there fairly round, I'm going to remove it from this particular mandrel. In my search on the internet, I came across this mandrel. It's being sold by MG Double Reeds. You can buy just the mandrel tip for $8. It's a beautiful tip. I glued it into an old screwdriver handle so I could work with it. I prefer this because I can set the reed down exactly to the stopping point here. And every reed that I make will be exactly the same on the inside by doing so. At this point, I will tighten the wire as tight as I can, especially this bottom wire. Very tight. Clip it off very short, fold it up, and then we'll move on to the first wire. This one doesn't need to be quite so tight. You see the blades are still apart here, but not much. So we want to keep that freedom up there as much as possible. Put this twist on the same side as the bottom one. Okay, you'll be able to see where the first wire was. Now if perchance the sides have slipped, this is a perfect opportunity for you to you can take your finger very gently with your thumbnail and push the blades back in the right place so that they line up perfectly even at the first wire. It's really much better if they haven't side slipped. Okay, not too tight. Don't indent the cane. And then we'll put the second wire on, same way we did before. And this one also, not too tight. The only one that is really tight is the bottom one, where the bogle is. Take your measuring stick, make sure you have it exactly 8 millimeters between the center of the first wire and the center of the second wire. Grab it out here, not up close, but out here, and twist. And just keep twisting till it's tight, and you're done. This reed is ready to be strung. And you take it off a beautiful round place for the bogle to go in. The reed is beautiful. Everything is straight, lined up, perfectly straight. This is the reed that I didn't form with the rubber band. This is the one that I put 3 wires on initially. And I'm going to show you an alternative way to the bevel, which will create a similar effect, possibly even a little safer. It doesn't require removing all the wires. What I will do though is I will remove the bottom wire. And I should be able to just pull that off because these wires are quite loose at this point. I'm going to take my utility knife and my pumpkin mandrel, and I'm going to take off a little bit of wood, about 3/8 of an inch up, creating a little space on both sides so that I have a hole here. And I'll turn it around. I'll do the other side the same way. And this is going to achieve pretty much the same effect. When I squeeze back here now, these blades open up. This has kept me from removing the wires, and it's a little less time consuming than the other way, although I do prefer the other method. You can try both methods. At that point, we'll put the third wire back on, much like we just did with the other one. Grabbing the wire out far, and then once it's on there, I'll go back to my MG mandrel and I will pull it tight. And if I go around in the circle part of my pliers, I can make it conform exactly to this. By twisting out here, you see the wire is not going to break. I cut it off short, I fold it up. These wires have become very loose in the drying process over the few days. So I will tighten that wire. I'll fold it down. And then I may have to measure this one again because it's quite loose. So let me just measure that again. Make sure it's perfectly 8 millimeters. And then just twist from the end. And now we have another reed that's ready for stringing. Perfectly straight. It's going to have nice flexibility up in the blade. Alright, at this point we're going to wrap it with string. I prefer cotton string over nylon string, for it leaves a softer foundation here, lets the reed vibrate a little more. Okay, this is actually embroidery floss. You can buy it in many different colors. This is a multicolor red. You'll see many different ways to string a reed, and hopefully you will find this way to be the simplest and save time, because the last thing we want to do is spend a lot of time putting string on a reed. I hold the reed sideways. I'm going to stick the string and hold it with my thumbnail so that the loose part of the string is towards the blade. I will go under and around and around and around. And let me stop here for a moment, because what I forgot to tell you is I'm using my reamer to hold this reed. The reason I do that is because with the tension, you don't want the reed to keep spinning off the mandrel, and the reamer will hold it tight. Okay, I will go around and around and around and around this way, all the way down over the string until I've covered up the string fairly well. And then these two fingers, your first finger and your thumb, will hold on to the string. You go up one side, down the other, up one side, down the other, up one side, down the other. And you keep doing this until you've made a really nice ball that you're satisfied with. With the multicolored, it's a little easier to see as you're going around. We take a little bit of pride in how this reed looks when it's all said and done. Okay? At this point, the simplest thing to do is grab the string with your hand this way. You make a loop, drop it over the reed, and right at the top of the ball, you pull it. And it's done. Very simple. I'll take my nippers then at this point. Maybe. And put some tension on that string and just nip it off. And the reed is ready to be glued. For that process, I will use Duco cement, which is available in any hardware store. Try not to drip it all over the place. You just need to apply a thin layer. Cover it nicely though, don't be cheap with the glue. And then when that is dry, apply a second coat. We'll put that over here to dry. Okay, we're going to start with a reed that's been strung. We're going to add another step which I find very beneficial to making a beautiful reed. What I'm going to do, which has already been done actually, is remove the first wire completely. A wonderful old bassoon player, Vincent Pezzi, had a style of reed making where he would loosen this first wire and pull it down and then scrape the reed. Thereby you could flatten out the blades a bit. I'm going to put it in the water just for a little while, just to soften it up. Just enough to get it soft and get a feeling for the cane. At this point, kind of flatten it out a little bit. Easier to do without the first wire on. As you can see, it's not a bad profile, but we're going to improve it a great deal by creating a spine. And it's easier to do this before you cut the tip and without the first wire on there. So what I'm going to do is start filing as a rooftop, staying away from this line running down the center and working out a beautiful plane this way. The reed is quite strong at this point because you haven't cut the tip. Once you cut the tip, it becomes very fragile. So it's got a little more strength to it. You can work a little more pressure on the file as you're doing this. I'm trying to get a spine. You can start to see a spine evolving, okay, on both sides. And we're just going to keep at this a little. This doesn't take long. Once again, I'm staying away from the center line. I'm working right up to the corners on both sides. Really want to balance these sides of the reed as best you can before you put the first wire back on. Let's see how we're doing. Okay, even a little more pronounced now. Other side is looking very good. Both sides looking very good. Okay, working very flat surfaces, much like a rooftop. Here you turn the file over and work out this way. And with the light at a certain angle, you can actually see the shadows forming on the reed. Still a little heavy. Really want to free up the sides of the reed. Once again, as I mentioned before, you keep your thumb on this file so that you're doing it this way, not out here. Turn it over. Keep it wet. See how we're doing. Looking very nice. Beautiful. Okay, a little bit more. Try to balance out the light that you see. Now I'm using my finger with the file. Working up in the corners, trying to lighten that out a bit. Boy, we're getting beautiful, beautiful looks on this reed. Let's do a little bit more. And I think I'll stop at this point. Now what happens now, this corner does up here look a little thicker. It could be discoloration in the cane. But let's just see if we can lighten it up a little. What we'll do now is we will sand a little bit on the whole side. This is wonderful because you don't have the first wire on there. This will even up the sides of the reeds. Along with part of the tubing, like so. A beautiful line out here, and a beautiful taper here, nice spine there, so on. Okay? What we'll do now is we will leave this to dry. This needs to dry for a day or two without the first wire on it. This is wonderful for those students of mine who continually tighten the first wire too much and strangle the reed. If you do that, the easiest thing to do is remove the first wire, soak the reed, and let it swell back up. This is going to have a beautiful shape to the first wire when it's dry. This reed's been through the processes I just showed you. I put the first wire back on. The sides look beautiful. Might need to be reamed, but I'm going to just dip it in the water a little bit. Maybe 4 or 5 seconds. It doesn't need much at this point. The cane is very porous still, so it will soak up water very quickly. I'm going to cut the tip at 28. This is once again a Rieger tip cutter. I'm going to set it for 28. Maybe a hair long, just so I have room for error. And then we're going to check and see. Open it a little bit with your fingers. We don't need to open it much. Okay, but if all went well with the filing, it's a little bit hard. But that's a good sign because we do want to work on it. Crowing very nicely. Okay, at this point we're going to start working on the tip. I mentioned before that there's a certain magic spot on the reed, 8 millimeters back from the tip. So what we're going to do is we're going to measure 8 millimeters back from the tip. This is a special spot on the reed. 8 millimeters back here, 8 millimeters back here. If you have a profiler and not a dial indicator, you can always have someone set up your profiler for this one particular spot. We want this 24 to 25 thousandths of an inch. This is the heart of the reed. So I'm going to put it on my dial, and I'm about a little over 25 on this side and a little over 25 on that side. So not much work to be done there. Keeping in mind that what I'm going to do is I'm going to start filing in a V fashion out this way from that spot. Like that. And then we'll go down and blend in the rooftop. Always keep working on one side of the reed and then the other side of the reed. Okay? And then as we get closer to the tip, we really want to thin that out. Use your light for shadows. The light will produce wonderful shadows that you can see against the reed. And you'll be able to see where there's wood that needs to be taken off. Basically what we want to do is remove the wood that shouldn't be there. Which sounds easy, but it isn't, okay? We're still working a rooftop. We're trying to maintain the center line all the way down, but a nice slope down the center, okay? Working out towards the corners, this way and this way. Okay, I turned it over. We're going to do the same thing to the other side now. Working in a rooftop, this way and then this way, and then out to the corners. But they're having a nice slope down from the center line too. This is a diamond file. Much easier to work with a diamond file than a regular file, because the regular file's only cut in one direction. With the diamond file, it will basically cut in any direction. Be very careful when you get to the very tip. And I'm going to lower my lamp in a minute so that I can actually see what I'm doing, which is always a good thing. Working one side and then the other side. One side, then the other side. This side appears to be heavier than the other side. I'm going to work it out, work it out. Try not to rip off the tip. And then the very tip, we need to really even out, even across the very tip. It's going to be quite thin the last millimeter. Working this way, working this way. And then back here, and back here. So that everything is smooth and even. Working here, across the tip, back here. I want to keep these planes as straight as possible. Okay, so you can see what we've done. We have a spine, we have a tip coming along nicely, and the crow is coming fairly nicely. At this point, I might want to sand the sides a little bit. The reed's a little wide on purpose. I like to do this to even out the railings so that the railings line up fairly nicely. And then I'm going to clip the corners a very little bit. Here and here. All right. And then we're going to spend a little bit of time now balancing the reed. We want to make sure it closes perfectly in the center. It looks like the wire side is pretty good. The top side, it seems a little heavy over here. So let's work that side just a little bit. See if we can balance out the reed. As you do this, I'm going to go down the whole side. You'll find that the crow will start to improve. The reed will start to vibrate as one. Beautiful. And now we've corrected that. It's a very new reed. But it's crowing about an E. And I think it's time to try it. Okay, so now we're going to put it on the bassoon. It's still a little unbalanced, but I'd like to know where we want to work with it at this point. And it needs to be reamed, but let's give it a shot anyway. Pretty nice, actually. I'm going to ream it just a little bit. I'm having to pinch it a little bit, which I don't like to do. So I'd like to have it a little higher in pitch, a little more supportive. Plus, it's a brand new reed. We have to consider that. Want to keep the crow around E. Close. Goes on a little further now. Could be freer in the low register, but once again, it's a new reed. I'm going to file a little bit in the back. I just want to free up the low register a little bit. Remember, keep your rooftop. Keep a nice shape to the rooftop. The tip is still quite thin. Let me just smooth this out. Tomorrow, or the next day, the reed will be a little more sturdy. And if there's a harder section, it'll show up a little easier, and then you can file a little bit more on the second day. The reed will improve day after day. The reed grows very easy now. Should be still very stable. So we're almost done with this reed for today, and it looks beautiful. I would say there's a little bit of wood right there, possibly the same thing on the other side. Just going to touch it. And sometimes if you just hold the reed under the light like this, not under the light, but so that you get to cast the shadows, you can actually see a little better where there's high spots and low spots. I want to thin out the tip just a little bit. Always keep nice, smooth surfaces. There's a lump right there that I hadn't seen. We'll get that. But nice, smooth surfaces all the way through this. About 1 millimeter opening to the reed, collapsing on the sides. Okay, so this reed is pretty much done for today. It plays well in 10-15 minutes. It will go up to the E and F. We're just going to let it sit. We want to maintain a nice shape to it. If there's things that will show up tomorrow, we'll come back with our file and just touch it very little, okay? But we want to make sure that the crow is always very free this way. We don't want to go searching for the crow. So try to keep the railings even. Maintain a nice shape to the tip so it always closes into the center. And tomorrow this reed will play much better than even today. But for now it's pretty well done. The only thing I would do in the next few days is I would soak it a little bit and check the balance. And if one of the quadrants is fighting a little bit, I would take my file and just go in here or in here and correct the balance, because it will change tomorrow. And that's it. We're going to review the tools that I used during this video. Bear in mind this whole video process took a number of weeks to put together because reeds need to dry. This is an old herder knife. I use this herder knife for splitting because the top of it is wide and you won't hurt yourself on it. So those of you that remembered what I did when I was splitting tubes or even watched that section will know that with a knife like this, you lay it on the top and you can just tap and the reed splits. So if you can find a nice knife like this, it's a lot cheaper than spending a lot of money for a tube splitter, which is not really necessary at all. All right? Then we went on to cutting the cane to length. For that you will need a guillotine, if in fact you're going to gouge the cane. The guillotine that I use is separate from my gouger because the gouger I have is very old and never came with a guillotine. So this is the guillotine from a broken gouger. And all this does is you put the cane inside. Once again, there's two steps here, over here. And this places the cane right there. I do this before I gouge because my gouger needs a longer piece of cane. When I'm ready to shape it, I'll move it down to the other step and chop it off there. And the guillotine just shortens the cane. Gouges are expensive. I was very fortunate enough years ago to find this gouger used from a person in New Zealand, and I've had it for at least 20 years, and it does a wonderful job. If you can afford a nice gouger, it's worth the money, because cane is much cheaper if you buy it by the tubes, and you have a little more control over the gouge using a real gouger. It has a curved blade here and works much like a curved plane. If you're going to profile cane, you're going to have to invest a lot of money into a profiler. This one, as I mentioned earlier in the thing, was handmade by a bunch of high school students about 45 years ago, and still is in fantastic shape. It's got a carbide blade, which doesn't get dull. The Rieger ones are very nice and very expensive. There's other ones on the market. You have a single barrel, which is what this is. You can get a double barrel, which actually contours the cane. And either way, you're still going to have to do a lot of work by hand. But some of the cheaper profilers just shred the cane, and they do a very bad job. So if you're going to invest in a profiler, invest in a good one. You're not going to profile with a profiler, as I mentioned before. Invest in a dowel that you can profile by hand. And we talked about these hose clamps with washers. This is a plastic rod of 1 inch in diameter. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines on it, so you can line up your cane on the ends. This is the collars. This is the center. And you can put the measurements anywhere you want for those. And that's the easiest way. And then I did mention starting off with a hacksaw blade. You just break the hacksaw blade in half. You're not going to use the side that actually was used for sawing. It's the back side. And if you get somebody to put it on a grinding wheel, just hold it up against the grinding wheel this way and go across it. It'll put a burr on one side of the blade. And that's what you want to be able to use scraping, and this will do a terrific job scraping the bark off of a piece of cane. There are two kinds of shapers. I use both in this video. This is a straight shaper. This is a Prestini number 1. Prestini number 2 is a little bit wider, and so on. Generally, the numbers, the wider the higher the number, the wider the shape is. This is a folding shaper. I think this is a Rigotti, but I'm not sure. Bought it many, many years ago. I much prefer the straight shaper. The reason I prefer the straight shaper is because once you've shaped the cane, the only part that you have to profile then is the part that's actually going to be a reed. With a shaper like this, you actually have to profile the entire piece of cane before you can fold it over and shape it. So find a shaper that's not too wide and not too narrow. Buy one of these utility knives. A fabulous investment. You can use this for shaping, you can use this for scoring, you can use this for a multitude of things. A lot of players use X-Acto blades. They don't last long at all. They're very, very small. They're very hard to work with. This Lennox blades that I spoke of, you can get from Home Depot with the gold on the tip of it, will last a very long time. A much safer tool to use, and when it's not in use, we can just close it up. So buy one of these. This is a Stanley, and you'll use it for the rest of your life. You want to invest in a nice pair of reed pliers. I've had a few over the years. These are actually needle nose pliers that I made reed pliers out of. I ground down the tip, and if you have a fairly large rat tail file, about as thick as a pencil or maybe even a little thicker, you can put it inside an electric drill. And then with it running, you just start squeezing your pliers, and eventually you'll end up with a perfect opening here, which you need for forming the reed. You need to find a pair of reed pliers that has a hole in it specifically made for forming the reed. So either invest in a professionally made pair or go make yourself another pair. Good strong pliers. This is a pair of nippers. Find a nice small pair of nippers. I use these for cutting wire sometimes. I use it for shortening the cane. I bought this pair at a flea market actually and ground it down so it was sharp. It wasn't sharp when I bought it, but you can find nippers everywhere. Don't buy a huge pair. Try to find a small pair of nippers. You won't need a very large pair. This is a popkin reamer. Try to keep it clean. Popkin makes some really nice tools. I really like this popkin reamer. I also use a Rieger reamer. This will take off wood a little faster than the popkin reamer. And then this is a Rieger diamond reamer. This is excellent for keeping in your bassoon case. And you're on stage and the reed is swelled up in the water and you need it to go on the bocal a little further. This doesn't take off a lot of wood, but it will do what you need to do, and it's very light and it keeps a beautiful smooth inside to the reed. So these are nice too. Rieger makes some beautiful tools. You want to order a set of diamond files. Here's a set that I got off of eBay. You can get like a whole set for $7 or $8, this size. You want ones that are flat, that come to a point, and then you can also use square ones at the top. A rat tail, diamond rat tail file is beautiful for removing filings inside of the reed when you're done reaming it. So this is a very inexpensive but very productive set of tools that you can get for not a lot of money. We also want to have a really nice ruler. I like this ruler. I got this also on eBay years ago. It's metric on one side, inches on the other. It's not too large, and because we measure the reeds all the time, you want to have a nice ruler that you can work with. I want to talk about plaques. I have an assortment of plaques that I keep around. This is the one I prefer. It's a Prestini, very thin, triangle-shaped plaque. I use this for all the final filings on the reed. There's also a rounded one that's very thin, and this is also good if you're going to file on the reed. Also on this particular plaque, there's a very fine piece of sandpaper glued to one side of it. The reason for that is when you have a reed that doesn't seem to be vibrating properly, you can put your plaque in it and push it to one side and push it to the other side, like this. And if one side is giving you more resistance than the other side, what you do is you take that little piece of sandpaper and just kind of lighten up the thing until this plaque floats easily on both sides of the reed. You can't do that with a thick plaque. It has to be a thin one like this. I do use thick plaques once in a while just to work on the railings. I keep a huge assortment. The Fox plaque is nice also for working on the railings. But for most of the purpose, I use just this one. I did invest in a lighted plaque. Actually, it wasn't an investment. It was a gift from one of my students. And it's quite a nice item. It will light up the inside of the reed. You can see the beautiful spine on this reed. And what we would do is if we saw a spot on there, we would lighten it up. So Miller Marketing has these, not to have a commercial. Miller Marketing has these for about $35, and Forrest, I think it's Forrest, has them for $100. So you be the judge of where you want to buy it. I want to talk about tip cutters. There's a lot of tip cutters on the market, and I really am against using anything like a nipper. Very difficult to do what you want to do with it. Especially don't like what oboe players use, the cutting block and the knife coming down. Very difficult. This Rieger tip cutter is by far an incredibly good investment. You can take off just the thickness of a hair on the tip of the reed. If the reed is just perfect, but just a little sag, tiny bit, you take it off and you've saved that reed. Back in the old days when I was doing it with the knife and stuff, I would have a reed that way. I would take it off and realize right away that I've taken off too much, or I've taken it off crooked, or for one reason or the other, I've ruined the reed. You will save many a reeds by investing in a good tip cutter. This is a Rieger. This is a dial. This is a Starrett dial. There's a lot of dials out there. This one was also handmade, not the dial, but the base. This is actually an old screwdriver ground down with lines put in it. This has been stable for the last 40 years. And my students at Buy Dials are still envious of this one because it keeps incredible accurate measurements. A lot of the ones that you buy in the store, you'll put your reed in, you get one measurement. You take the reed out, you put it back in, now you have a different measurement. And this goes on, and it's very hard to use it. So I don't use it a lot, but I use it mostly at the tip of the reed. If you can find one with a Starrett dial, I would think those would be the best. This is brass wire. This is very soft, number 22 brass wire. This is supposedly the same wire, number 22, soft brass wire, but this one has a lot of spring to it. And I prefer this kind of wire that doesn't have as much spring to it. It's really soft. So if you can find some that is not so brittle, has so much tension in it, this one doesn't want to bend easily. So look for really soft brass wire, number 22 soft brass wire. This is a Popkin drying rack. I've had it many years. I'm not sure, I don't think he makes this anymore. I know Chris Lee makes a very good drying rack. One of my students recently bought one. What you want is a drying rack with long pins that the pins come out. It's really important so that when we're wrapping it with the rubber bands, if we want to do that, you'll be able to do that. Pick the pin up, wrap the reed with it, put it back in here. So if you can find one similar to this, another worthwhile investment. These kinds of pins are nice, but they're not really long enough for forming the reed. This is off another drying rack. So you can see the difference there completely. Try to find one that has very long, very much like your forming mandrel, which we're going to talk about now. This is a Popkin forming mandrel. The newer ones come with a line engraved at the bottom down here. This is so old that it didn't have a line, but I had Mark Popkin himself engrave that line on there for me. This is a Fox forming mandrel. They're very similar. I prefer the Popkin one for forming the reeds. And then, as I mentioned in the wire tightening, I got this mandrel from MG Double Reeds. The reason I like this one is it has a stopping ledge. So I put the blank down here, tighten the wires really tight at this, and then they all come out exactly the same on the inside. This is a reed knife. I don't use a reed knife much anymore, but if you're going to buy one that's easy to sharpen. This one I believe I got from Miller Marketing. Wasn't terribly expensive. If you get one that folds, it's nice because you can carry it in your bassoon case. Hollow ground knives are actually easier to sharpen. This one is not really a hollow ground knife. It's kind of beveled at the very end. It's a little more difficult to sharpen. If you're convinced on using a reed knife, then invest in a nice sharpening stone. This is rough on one side, fairly smooth on the other. You can put a little water on the stone and just, with the blade flat, take it down this way, and then if you're left-handed or right-handed, you want to put a burr on the opposite side. I'm left-handed, so I want the burr here. So I will lift it up just a little bit as I go across the stone and put a little burr on there, and I'll be able to feel it removing from my fingernail. You want to invest in sandpaper. It's cheap. This is 220 grit. That's a good place for doing some heavy-duty work. When I'm doing the beveling, this is 180, so this is quite a bit rougher than this. This is 500. 500 or 600 is really good for finishing the reed. When you're doing the final finishing, what you want to do is just buy big sheets, cut them down. A little trick that you may not know is when the reed is almost finished, if you sand it very lightly so it's just like glass, this way, and then before you remove the debris on there, fold the sandpaper back over and go over it with the back side. And this will really smooth out the grain nicely on that reed and make it very smooth to your lips. So it's a wonderful way to finish off the reed. It will also kind of, bring the pores together, and the reed seems to last a little bit longer that way than if you leave the pores wide open. I only do that with a 5 or 600 sandpaper. I know some individuals can't work on a reed unless they have a mandrel to hold, especially if you're going to finish the reed with a knife. This is a Popkin, once again Popkin double ender. Has a forming mandrel on one side. It's not really for forming, it's more for just making sure your tube is re-straight if it's been sitting in your case. This is something that you would carry around in your bassoon case. And then it has a short mandrel, adequate for holding while you're working on the blade. When I do use one, this one was made from a mandrel, and I just put some plastic at the end of it, and it fits into my hand. It's a little easier to work with this little ball in my hand. It's easier to turn, and you don't have this huge piece of metal in the way. So if you can make one of those, more power to you. It's a very handy little tool. Keep one in your case too, so you have something on stage when you want to trim a reed, touch it up a little bit or something like that. Okay, this is embroidery floss. You can buy a whole package of it in different colors. For $5 or $6 you have enough string to make 100 reeds. I like the cotton over the nylon. The nylon tends to strangle the reed a little bit, so the cotton creates a nice buffer. These are all done with cotton over here. Duco cement. 2 coats of Duco cement. Go to your hardware store and get some Duco cement. Let's turn it the right way. This way. Okay, and then one other thing. Hard to see. This is my prize reed case. You can barely make it out, but it does say Heckle up in the corner. It's probably 80 or 90 years old. I bought it years ago on eBay, and it was already old at the time. I love this case because it has places for the reeds just to lay into, like this. If you're going to buy a reed case, buy a nice one. Either that or an Altoids box. Put some tissue in the bottom of it, and make sure you put holes in it. Because if there's no holes in it, the reeds will get moldy and turn black, and that's very important. You don't want to keep reeds in those plastic boxes like Jones reeds come in, or the little plastic tubes like you buy other reeds in. The reed will get moldy, turn black, and that will be the end of the reed. Not to mention that you can get sick from playing on it. Okay, so have a nice reed box. Look around for somebody who's making a nice reed box, sturdy reed box. This is your livelihood. Without these reeds, nothing comes out of that bassoon. Okay, over the 47 years that I've been making reeds, I've learned a lot from a number of players. Some are former students that went off to college, some are professional players. Everything that I'm showing here basically has come from ideas of other people and compiled together. I've experimented a tremendous amount, but I do want to give gratitude to all of those musicians who have come to my studio and shared their ideas with me.